Let's head into the newscast with the latest coming in on the Iran nuclear deal. Signaling a thaw in tensions, both US and Iran have finally decided to resume denuclearization talks in Vienna. The decision follows mixed signals from Tehran on reaching out to the US. Officials from both sides will be traveling to Vienna next week. They are not expected to hold direct face-to-face talks, but will be part of a broader discussion involving all major world powers. This is how one European diplomat put it, and I quote, "Iran and the US will be in the same town but not the same room." A senior European Union official revealed that the aim was to reach an agreement in 2 months. The talks will focus on creating a list. This list will detail the sanctions that America can lift and the nuclear obligations that Iran should meet. The hope is to find common ground between both the sides. The decision to resume the talks in Vienna follows a virtual meeting on Friday. Iran, China, Russia, France, Germany and Britain participated in the meeting. Washington welcomed the virtual engagement as a positive move and promised mutual steps. Iran's Foreign Minister Javad Zarif seemed upbeat about the outcome too. He voiced support for the choreographed lifting of sanctions and a gradual return to nuclear obligations. But he ruled out a meeting with the US, calling it unnecessary. The proposed meeting in Vienna has been described as indirect talks. The US would have been hoping for a more proactive response from Iran. Nonetheless, Joe Biden will be happy with this development. He will dispatch Iran envoy Rob Malley and National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan to Vienna for the talks. For more details, let's quickly go across to our correspondent Susan Tehrani, who's joining us live from the United States. Susan, what are the stakes for US and Iran? Not to forget Biden's tricky position in the US Congress, especially on the issue of Iran.
Absolutely, stakes very high at this point in time for both countries, as you rightly mentioned. On the one hand, Iran is very close for upcoming elections in June, and possibly as things continue or not continue, we may see a new negotiating team come to the stage, one that the Europeans and the United States is not familiar with, and one that might perhaps not be as moderate as the one that the negotiating side has been dealing with. That all depends on the outcome of the Iranian presidential election, albeit we all know that the ultimate decision making in this deal and foreign policy issues does lie with Iran's supreme leader. On the other hand, there is a concern here in the United States and among European countries that Iran is moving very fast towards enrichment, and that's something that the United States and its European allies really want to put a stop to, even if it means unfreezing some of Iranian assets and some form of sanctions relief if Iran agrees to, at least for a short period of time, halt its enrichment program. That's something that just recently was brought to the table. The numbers were something that both sides disagreed on, but then yesterday there was a report by Politico that perhaps there is an opportunity for negotiation on that side as well. Inside the United States, the Biden administration is very weary of getting the backing of Congress when ultimately, push comes to shove and there is going to be a moment where it has to remove some sort of sanctions, because Joe Biden himself cannot do that. He has to go to Congress and get that approval, and that's very unlikely among Republicans at this point.
Right. The approval is going to be unlikely, as you rightly mentioned. Having said that, Susan, in January, the Iranian Foreign Minister Javad Zarif had said that Europe has done nothing to protect the nuclear deal. Is Europe finally ready to play a more active role?
I think the stakes are very high at this point in time, but I think we also need to take into consideration that when one party, that being the United States, officially came out and stepped out of the Iran nuclear deal, it was very hard for the restoration of that deal, considering the fact that we have to look at the reality on the ground and not just diplomatically. And the reason that I think these parties came into the deal was not only to curb Iran's nuclear activities, but Iran came into this deal to see U.S. sanctions be lifted. And, you know, when the United States leaves the deal, it's very difficult to sort of set a negotiation with Europe. And at the same time, I think we did hear during the Trump administration that Europe was very weary in dealing with the United States and its foreign policy towards the European Union in general, because Donald Trump was so focused on his America First policy. So, you know, a lot of people are saying they're not sure what more the Europeans could have done during the Trump administration. But I think at this point, when there's a willingness on the part of the Biden administration, and I think with a diplomatic savvy foreign minister like Javad Zarif, the prospects are very real that perhaps this diplomatic path may move forward, maybe not as soon as they hope before June, before Iran's presidential election, but nonetheless move forward. And I think that there is a sense of urgency and willingness on the part of the Europeans as well to salvage this deal, because at the end of the day, for a lot of those countries, it's a legacy issue as well.
Right. The presidential election in June this year in Iran, of course, is going to be quite a bone of contention for the entire negotiation process. Having said that, thank you so much, Susan Teherani, for bringing in those inputs from New York. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.